Okay, this is part 3 of the Odyssey, Monty. We've finally gotten here. The thing that actually spurred us on to do this whole series and gave us the initial spark. Actually, I mean, I've in our own games in the past, we've done Game of the Year type award type things, you know. But part of it was that when we saw the LoL Esports one, let's say that the process wasn't very satisfactory. The games that it came up with weren't really to be categorized as Game of the Year. So the idea was, let's put together a real list of the games that we can think of that were Games of the Year or that people should go back and watch. And I wanted this not just to be awarding Game of the Year, but the idea would be someone who only saw a few games or maybe only watched one or two regions could go back and think, right, well, I'll watch these games and these will be all the good ones and get up to date on it all. So the concept makes sense.
It does. It's great. And I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate being able to go back and see some of these games that they didn't see before.
So we'll start out with Games of the Year, then we'll do series, and then we'll end with some play, like specific plays. And so the concept for the Game of the Year one is, again, we'll break it down by region. So again, it's not like we're just going to... The problem I've realized in the past with some award shows is normally you just want to make it like Game of the Year and Series of the Year, but then everyone's going to get mad that only Korean games will be featured or whatever. So this way, everyone gets a medal now. You're all winners. I've learned what America's all about, Monty, you know. Participation medal.
Why do people get mad about seeing the best gameplay? We're just trying to give them helpful advice. You know what I mean? Like,
they need to relate to the people who win the games, Monty, you know. It's all well and good that this Korean fella did a really good job, but he doesn't seem to have a personality, so that's not actually that good. So anyway, with all that said, we'll skip right into this. So we'll do Korean Game of the Year first. And what we'll do is, first of all, we'll list the games that we picked out as candidates, and then at the end, we'll decide which the Game of the Year is. So the first one I have here, this particular one's going to be in chronological order, because technically, people might not realize this, but since winter does span more than just the year, because that's the way the season works, we think of SKT's dominance as being in 2013 and they dominated then, and then in 2014 you think to yourself, they didn't win anything. Well, actually, technically, the winter season they won, the one they went undefeated in, ended in this year. So, believe it or not, the best series of that tournament was the one against KT Bullets in the semis, where that was really the two best teams meeting. They just happened to be on the same side of the bracket. And in this series, Game 3, this is the one we've picked out as like a potential Game of the Year candidate. And this was the game where, describe the basics of it, right, Monty? KT Bullets was about to win the game.
Well, they were definitely heavy in the lead.
And then what could possibly stop a really good team who were about to win a game, and then the other team was like losing definitely? What could stop that? I mean, now I don't want you to say like one player, Monty, because I'm reliably informed no one has ever 1v9'd in League of Legends. Actually, it's a team game, and you win by friendship and synergy, and like everyone in the team has to be like on the same page. And what could stop someone winning such a game?
Well, there's a force of nature named Faker that actually managed to pull this one out of the fire for SK Telecom and preserve their undefeated season. First off, I think that I think we have to contextualize a lot of these games, because some of them are very important, like storyline games that have significance in terms of rivalry or in terms of previous results. And this game in particular was like the last time that we got to see what was one of the greatest rivalries in League of Legends, which was the peak form SK Telecom and KT Bullets, who for like 8 months were pretty much the two best teams in League of Legends, even though KT Bullets didn't go to Worlds in 2013. But they hit each other multiple times in multiple best of fives. And so this was the last time that we were going to see KT Bullets versus SKTK with those rosters. And by those rosters, I mean Faker, Impact, Bengi, Mandu, Piglet versus Ryu, Kakao, Insec, Score, and Mafa. So in that reason alone, that this was the last time that we saw that rivalry, it was pretty exciting. And even though it was a 3-0, it was a really close 3-0, and especially this last game where it was Ryu on Gragas versus Faker on Riven. And KT Bullets had come out to this big lead. Score was playing Vayne. He was getting pretty fed. And what happened was Faker, in what will also be definitely a candidate for one of the plays of the year on Riven, actually managed to nearly, like, pretty much win this game by himself. And there is a really great play by Faker where it looks like they're about to lose a team fight, and Impact and Bengi are like at 10% HP both, and Score is coming up on Vayne at full HP, trying to actually finish off these kills. And it looks like the positioning is very good for KT Bullets, but Faker makes this crazy Riven flash play to actually win the team fight. And that was definitely one of the candidates for play of the year. Anyway, this game ends. KT Bullets, or SK Telecom, turns it around. They get KT Bullets Nexus down to 100 HP before being wiped. And then KT Bullets nearly reverse push into SK Telecom's base before SK Telecom is able to chase them down and finally finish out the game. But the best part about this game is when the Nexus has 100 HP and the full screen of Faker just like freaking out that they're about to lose this game. And I'm sure somebody will screenshot that and put it in there. But definitely one of the best games of 2014. And if you missed that game, I feel very sad for you, and you should go back and rewatch it because it's really, really exciting.
And one of the best comebacks in this respect as well.
Yeah, one of the best comebacks for sure.
Okay, so another game we have here. This one's going to be from a bunch of the rest of the Korean ones are from the same season. Here's what's funny, Monty, is that when we think back on 2014, I remember when OGN Spring happened, and we all said, and I think rightly so if you look through history, this was the best season of OGN ever, actually, because the playoffs were awesome. You had all these series that were really good, and it was really competitive, you know. No one actually knew when the round of 8 started in Spring who would win. There was 3 or 4 or 5 candidates for it. But actually, summer produced a whole bunch of games that were really awesome. And so one of the ones I want to talk about now is when Blue and Samsung White met in the semi-finals. They'd met in the previous semi-finals and we all thought White was going to win and go and take the title. Instead, Blue had won that one. When they met the second time, I mean, you want to say, okay, well, Blue won it before, so they're going to win this. But no, it was like sort of the same thing, I think. Everyone thought, right, well, Blue got him last time, but, you know, White are surely going to get him this time. Like, they'll get him this. And so in game one, that's what you thought, Monty. But what happened in game one of this series?
The Blue versus White game one in the summer semis was particularly interesting. And just contextualizing this as well, it was really like the quintessence of Blue versus the quintessence of White. White got this big early game lead, showing off their mechanics. Def died like 5 times in lane to Imp, Mata, and Dandy, and so it looked like White was going to be able to snowball it out. But Blue showed their team fighting prowess in this game. They came back and won the game in a very Blue fashion. Def, in spite of his massive early deficit, proved why he was one of the greatest AD carries of 2014 by dealing a surprising amount of damage and really coming back into the game in spite of how far behind he was. And it also showed how Dada is able to carry during that kind of situation and the superiority over their late game shot calling. So just a fantastic showing by Blue, and also highlighted some of White's kind of continuing weaknesses in closing out games late, especially if they're delayed into heavy team fighting phases. So really, really good game. And another example of an absolutely fantastic comeback. Oh, one thing I didn't mention earlier about the SK Telecom KT Bullets game was that game ended dead even in gold at 67.9K for both teams. So it was like, you don't really get games that were much closer than the KT Bullets versus SKTK game.
The thing is, for the White versus Blue game you're mentioning here as well, that actually was, when you look back on it now, knowing how White eventually overcame them, it's like, that's the reason why it always felt like White was going to win, because you knew in the early part of the game White would have the advantage in most of the games. But the problem was, it's almost like those two. What's funny is those two teams, because you can tell White did copy things off Blue, it felt like they were mirror images in terms of the strategical approach and the picks, but actually they were like diametrically opposed in terms of the strengths. Yeah. So the funny thing was, if White could have stomped them hard enough early, then they would have won those games. But it's like Blue could always hang on just enough to where they took over in some of the games.
That was what was so impressive about that game one, was like they probably couldn't have stomped Blue harder in the early game, and Blue still won.
And obviously, when you then know the context of what White did at Worlds, it makes it even more impressive that before then, Blue was able to beat them, because you know what they were actually capable of as a team, you know. So, another game from the same season is in the final. We have KT Arrows versus Samsung Blue, and this was where Blue was up 2-1, And this game, I remember this one very vividly because this was a really close game the whole time. And actually, from what I remember, even though it was close, it was like Blue would always be slightly ahead for most of the first part of the game. Like maybe the first 2/3, they were always slightly ahead, or they'd have the fight just slightly going. And so it felt like, oh, this is where Blue wins the final. You know, like, yeah, okay, KTR's got a game off them, well done. Like, but now Blue probably wins this game 4 and it's over, and the title goes to them. And you know, the storyline we all thought was going to play out. So, what was crucial about this game? How could KTRs win this game?
Well, this was a really good one too, because the problem is that KT Heroes was very reliant on their skirmish-based style and getting those early leads in order to win, and they were behind by about 2K gold in the mid game here, and Samsung Blue had Twitch, so they had Twitch and Kasten. Rookie was not doing well on Yasuo. Dade was doing very well. And this Twitch was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, of course, that's the exact opposite thing you want if you're trying to play against Blue, because they will just 5v5 you and probably win. And not only that, they had Zillion as well, who just kept on reviving everybody. So the thing about this game that was very impressive is that KT Heroes actually managed just to continuously fight this game. And this game's very entertaining because it's literally like a kill a minute the entire game. There's so many fights in this game, so many kills, and KT Heroes just managed to force their playstyle kind of onto Samsung Blue by just repeatedly fighting them at every possible opportunity and not giving Blue that many chances to actually get that full 5v5 team fight. And this game is just great because there are a couple fights in the mid lane that are really back and forth, like basically one team will win a fight, run down the mid lane, then the other team will spawn, win that fight, run back down the mid lane. And so it's super back and forth until Someday gets this insane like teleport home guard Maokai flank to actually like help close the game, which kills enough members of Blue that they're able to take Baron, and they're able to take an inhibitor and Baron. And so this is really interesting because Blue has this great late game team comp. They can still come back from an inhibitor down. And so what Kakao does is he just sits in the brush in the river by Baron and waits for Heart to walk Pi, and then just like Nocturne ults him, kills him, and then they're actually able to win the game. So it was a really on the rocks game for KT Arrows, but they win it in this very bloody style, super entertaining game. Very high level like skirmishes and team fights, and yeah, just the turning point in that series too. Because at that point, if you had asked me like halfway through that game, I would have been like, "Yep, Blue wins this 3-1 finals to Blue." But KT Arrows rally and actually make it work, and then end up winning the series as a result of that game.
Plus, I think contextually, one of the key things to say about that game is that what made it one of the game of the year, or one of them anyway, or a potential Korean game of the year, is that this was a game where, like you're saying, Blue could have won it. They were in position to win it. So the difference is most of the other games, when anyone in the world managed to beat Blue, and it only happened obviously like 5 games the whole year in terms of like big finals and stuff, tended to be stuff like you smash them down super early, or you get the jump on them early, you know, you stop them getting to that late game phase. This was probably the only time I think Blue lost a game where it actually went Blue's way, and they got into their world, into their realm, where they're like, right, this is where we want to be. Then they lost. Usually, it was another scenario where they could possibly lose. You know, this was more like someone actually beat them at their own game, amazingly.
Yeah, and and it's just a constant fighting, and like you're saying, not only a kind of a surprising upset from the KT Heroes, but that is a very action-packed, very entertaining game.
Now, the last 2 I had for Korean Game of the Year were both from the same tournament, the summer one, but it was in the group. And this was when Blue played versus SKT. And I actually had both Game 1 and Game 2. Because what's weird is usually group stage games, I mean, personally, I don't care about the group stage games that much myself, you know, because usually it's fairly obvious. Like the top seed's usually going to win. Or unfortunately, with the OGN format, often you'll get like a 1-1 split if it's good teams, you know. And it usually feels like they're not that exciting as games. But I thought actually the context for these 2 was pretty cool because SK Telecom, this is where they'd come off the bad spring season where they'd almost gone out in the group stage of spring, then they'd gotten smashed completely by White. And then you come into the next season and obviously Blue were the champions. And we've had Masters in the meantime where Blue and White took turns to sort of tag team, beat the shit out of SKT. And so at this point you feel like, okay, SK Telecom's definitely done and like it's the Samsung time now. But actually, in this series, almost to pick up on what had happened in the Master Series, where SKT did have that one cool game against, I think it was Blue also. In this actual series, we actually did get to see like really high-level play from SK Telecom. But that also that's what made me realize, Monty, SK Telecom never was actually going to beat the Samsung teams is because in this particular series, it's like SK Telecom did everything they could. They kept pushing, and they'd only be a little bit behind, right? They were always one kill or one fight from 20, and it's like, oh, they're going to win. But Blue, the whole time, it's almost like they were toying with them. They just kept ahead, and you just couldn't beat them in that late game phase. It's like you had to have gone crazy early on.
Right, and both these games were very close, and Faker and Piglet played really well. Impact was a little bit underwhelming in this series compared to Acorn, but they were both like 45-minute games, just really solid play, and definitely worth revisiting, I think.
Okay, and we have one more, actually. I just forgotten about one more. And yeah, for anyone who doesn't like the fact that like Samsung keeps getting mentioned here, there's another game features Samsung, features SKT. Oh, what a surprise! This one was also from summer. Like, Jesus Christ, was this just the best season ever, or what? It turned out it was. In its own way, it was, because in the round of 8 that time, White met SKT again. Game 2 is the one that I picked out here. Now, Game 1 was where SKT amazingly won the game. You were like, holy shit, are they actually going to, can they win this time, But then Game 2 was this super close game. Like, this was one where literally it's sort of like pillar to post. It was close the whole way. Super close in kills. Like, it ended barely any difference in that sense. Fighting in each other's bases. Like, this was a really awesome game. Again, it's another one where, yeah, SK Telecom loses the game. So, it really, the Samsung teams are dominant. But obviously, you can have a great game, even if there's a difference between the two teams. It's how they play on the actual context just of the game, What do you think it was in terms of when White would meet SKT? Why do you think White was always dominating SKT this year?
I just think that SKTK just didn't have that same late game presence in terms of team fighting that Samsung Blue did to take advantage of White's like relative lack of coordination late, and therefore their weakness. Just because like SK Telecom K has always been a team, at least with Piglet and Faker, playing together, that has thrived on pick compositions and like split push, and so they just weren't as good as Blue at going into these 5v5s. Meanwhile, White at the time, I think with Imp, he's another like playmaking AD carry like Piglet. That's why that rivalry was always so interesting, was because their play styles and their champion pools were always so similar. And so I think that White was just able to outplay SK Telecom K in terms of creating picks, and so that was the big deciding factor in that series. Also at the time, Zillion wasn't a big pick yet, and Faker had been spamming in solo queue, and Faker won Game 1 doing really well on Zillion, and then White just banned, in Game 2 what you're talking about, White banned Zillion, and that was it.
Plus, if you think of classic SKT when they were at their peak, obviously their synergy big combo was the mid and AD carry. It was Faker and it was Piglet. Well, in this particular game I'm talking about now, you get to see another AD carry in mid, sort of dumpster the SKT players, because Imp has some crazy stuff. He gets like 10 kills or something.
He's 10, 4, and 5.
Pawn never dies in the whole game. So I think how rare that is if you'd watched only the year before. This is the sort of game where if you could travel someone forwards in time, you'd be like, oh, look what happens to SKT now. And they'd be like, what the fuck? And then you'd send them back in time just with that knowledge of what's coming in the future, So basically, if Thorin was like in Back to the Future 2 and he went back with Monte Cristo's like esports almanac, I'd place all the bets and win the massive odds, a year in advance that SKT would get dumpstered by Samsung White. Like that's how I would win the bets and form my own evil empire that should never have existed. Basically, Monty, like Biff. I'm actually now build myself as Biff, whatever his name, Buchanan or something out of Back to the Future.
There you go.
So, of all these games we just picked here, who is the winner for Korean Game of the Year?
It's so hard because, like, for me, it's either KTB versus SKTK Game 3 or KTA versus Samsung Blue Game 4. I mean, both of those games were super close and very meaningful. I do think that the SKT-KTB is more interesting in terms of continued rivalry and storyline, and the fact that that game ended like literally even in gold is pretty crazy. But I think KT Arrows versus Blue, just in terms of it being a final and turning around and allowing KT Arrows to win, is more impactful than like preserving SKTK's undefeated season, because KT Bullets were unlikely, I think, to win that series anyway. But it's so hard. because like that's a great example of like a Faker 1v9 game where he goes like fucking crazy on a high mechanic champion like Riven and actually just hard carries and has like definitely one of the top plays of the year. So
I think it has to be the final one though, because not only was it a final, but they had to win that game to stave off elimination.
Yeah.
And then add in that both teams played great. It wasn't like Faker. Like, listen, I worship Faker's all money, but both teams played great in that game. That's what made it a great game.
I think SK Telecom did pick it up in the late game though. But yeah, it's close for me, but we'll give it to KT Arrows versus Samsung Blue Game 4.
Okay, then we'll just we'll give the runner-up then is that game then, SKT versus KTB.
But definitely go back and watch SKTK versus KTB. That game is amazing.
So now we'll go to the Chinese region. And first of all, I just want to say shout-outs for this section because you're out of your fucking mind if you think we were going to go and watch like 100 games of, like, you have to realize there was like 12 offline competitions last year in China money, not just, and that's including so luckily we have people who have seen them all, who we were able to source for the good games, and then we picked from the good games what the best ones were. So for this section, like, huge shout outs to Kelsey Moser and Froscorin from their work.
Yes, thank you.
LPLEN and On Gamers and LOL Esports and all those wonderful publications and outlets. And so from those ones, here are the ones that we picked as candidates for potential Chinese Game of the Year. So one of the first ones was Week 8, Day 3 of LPL Summer, and it was when Starhorn Royal Club played against OMG, and it was the second game of the set. And this is a game where it was a really close game. Korn, the mid laner, had a really good game on Oriana. This was kind of like a performance where people hadn't thought of him as a particularly good player beforehand. And obviously he was going against Cool, who's like a legendary player within the region, and a year before was the MVP, and this season would actually go on to be the MVP as well, or something along those lines. So do you remember anything from this game of note?
Yeah, this was a really cool game, actually. No pun intended. But another reason coming into this in terms of storylines for the LPL, and I'm sorry to Kelsey and Drexen and Frosker and all the China Talk members for butchering the storyline so badly right now, but I really like this game because this shows off OMG when they had Cloud before they benched him, and this was kind of OMG's like peak power, I think, during the summer season before they actually did really well in the quarterfinals at Worlds and actually nearly made it through to the finals as well when they put Cloud back in. So this was before the dark times of Dada 777 in the LPL playoffs, through regionals, through the group stages at Worlds, and the end of the summer season as well. But basically, this is a great game in terms of a comeback for Starhorn Royal Club, and Korn has just like an insane Baron steal with Oriana in this game, and they just show fantastic late game team fighting. Starhorn Royal Club is at a deficit like this entire game. They even win this game with a goal deficit, which is pretty nuts. But Korn like steals a Baron while Cola is split pushing the bottom in like inhibitor turret with Jax. So they get this really great position on the Baron, manage to get the steal, manage to get the inhibitor turret at the same time, and just really awesome comeback. Really, really good comeback. Very exciting game to watch, and definitely recommended.
Also, for some additional context, just to really show our gratitude, Monty, towards those people you just listed before, particularly Kelsey, because I know she's a big OMG fan. Also watch this game, because everyone who only watched Worlds and thinks, well, of course, Starhorn Royal Club were the best Chinese team, and Uzi is by far the best player. Go back and watch this game when OMG had Cloud at their peak, not just when they put him in like a series before, and watch the difference between your beloved Starhorn Royal Club without that like Magic the Gathering enchantment that they get for Worlds, where every monster gets +2 and you remove an enemy monster from the battlefield, whatever the fuck it was doing, Go and watch this game and you'll see that, listen, Starhorn Royal Club was a good team, but OMG was like a level above, domestically at least, in this particular era.
Yeah, the other thing too is like in this game, San ends the game like 8-1-1 on Tristana, and Uzi is only 2-1-8. And Uzi did a good job this game, but San was definitely like crushing him for most of the game.
And the next game we're going to go to now is from the grand final of the same season, LPL Summer, and this was EDG versus OMG. And this game, oh boy. In this game, Monty, I think it was like 11 or 12-0 in kills, and it was such a stomp that they literally, like, the game wasn't actually over. They hadn't even gotten into the base or anything.
They were taking Baron.
Okay, but the OMG was literally just like, I think we'll just play game 2 now. Like, you have to realize, by the way, for context, in China, actually, apparently, if you do give up, you just tend to, like, say, fuck it, go to the next game. It's not as big a deal to do that, whereas obviously in NA, you'd fight to the bitter end, 78 minutes or something, you know?
Of course you would. Like, I think any team in any other region really would. Occasionally you see surrenders here in Korea, but almost never anywhere else. But to contextualize this further, first off, coming into the finals, just because of the way the double elimination worked, it's a best of 5, right? And it's OMG versus EDG. EDG, coming out of the winner's bracket, has a game advantage. So by surrendering, they are basically, in the first game, giving 2-0 immediately to EDG, making the chances of a comeback much smaller, right? But why this game is so great is EDG is just like, this is like the purest form of EDG, and why they were so good and why they were so disappointing at Worlds as well. Like, Clearlove has a fantastic game on Evelynn. You see EDG's patience here. They just wait for their opponents to make these mistakes and then immediately capitalize on them. There's some really good teleport play from Koro in this game, and they just capitalize on every single one of OMG's little mistakes. And OMG doesn't even get a kill in this game. It's like 22 minutes in, and they just get completely rocked. EDG's getting a free Baron pretty much at this point, and OMG straight up surrenders. So this is the point where you really like look at EDG, and this is why, because this game happened at the end of August, so very close to Worlds, why people thought that EDG was going to be a very strong team and potentially a finalist at Worlds if they got into the right side of the bracket. Obviously, they massively underperformed at Worlds for whatever reason, but at this point in time, they were looking absolutely terrifying.
And plus, even though I build it like that, like, how could they surrender after 22 minutes when the base isn't even taken? I actually, when you do watch the game, it is understandable why, because the level of soul crush at it's like every 5 minutes they just get a new reminder, like, you can't do anything in this game, you can do fucking nothing, every single small mistake you make you get punished for, and it's like eventually you just want to be like, can we just start the game again so I can have a chance to win, you know?
Yeah, it's a great, I think that we wanted to show this game just because it is a really good example of dominance by a team in a final, which is pretty rare to see actually, unless there's like a big like regional mismatch like what happens at Worlds. But yeah, it was very, very convincing from EDG and a really good win, and it's a short game too, so you can watch it and just be amazed by EDG's skill.
So from the same tournament, Monty, OMG, when they'd played against Starhan Roll Club, and this is when they had Dada 77, so it wasn't the same team that had stomped Starhan Roll Club earlier in the season, like in our previous game, 2 before. They had a game in Game 4 of this series that was a very back-and-forth series, where this fellow Cool, who again actually, if people only have watched Worlds, the China section is actually an ideal section because you get to see all these different teams and players in a totally different light than you maybe saw them at Worlds. Because at Worlds actually, Cool wasn't particularly much of a carry there. It was mainly Going, or Loveling had a few games where he was pretty nice, and then Cloud came into the lineup. But actually, Cool never really was the hard carry that this sort of game suggested he could be, because in the regional matchups, the key thing was he never dominated every game, but he'd have like a clutch game. And here was one, because he wasn't known as some Yasuo player, but he gets like 21-8 on Yasuo. And
21-8.
Yeah, don't think that, by the way, means that like, oh, yeah, I guess he was playing versus some really bad players or whatever. Like, just watch this fucking game and you'll see like ridiculous carrying. This is I mean, I think we talked about on past Summer Insight. This was a game that really makes you think he's like a hard carry guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very impressive performance from him, and he just basically walks around the map slaying absolutely everybody. And also, to put this in context, like, San only had 4 kills that game, Going had 3, Dreg had 4, and Dada had 1. So like, there are 7, 11, 31 kills in the game on his team, and Cool has 20 of them. 20. The game, and oh, by the way, the game is less than 28 minutes long. he had one killer assist every minute of that game.
And that's the thing. This is exactly the sort of game where even like, listen, when Monty was talking about the previous game, the EDG versus OMG game, by the way, I'll warn you right now, that's a classic Monty game you'd want to see, where it's like you just tactically crush someone's soul with very small, like death by 1,000 cuts. Where actually, if you're a fan of like those really like the Cole versus Curse game, you're not going to love that one. I'm telling you already. I'm warning you on that one. You're not going to enjoy it. This game, you could be any fucking dude at 4th of July watching fireworks go off. You're going to love this game. It's just someone dumpstering everyone on Yasuo. That's what you guys like. It's like solo queue. It's exactly the game you wish you had on solo queue. Just watch this game. If you watch nothing else of Asian people on this list, watch this game. You will enjoy it. I guarantee. Thorin seal of approval.
You'll enjoy KTA versus Samsung Blue as well. That game has like 1 million kills in it.
So, of those 3 we picked out then, which is the winner, do you think, for the Chinese Game of the Year?
I would actually hand it to the comeback for Starhorn. I think that was a really, really exciting game and a really impressive showing of how you can come back even if you're at a pretty massive gold deficit. So I'd take the actual regular season game between OMG and Starhorn. Also because that game was OMG and it's like peak roster, and some of these other games were OMG when Dada was face-checking brushes. So I just don't feel that was as good of a display of skill, personally.
So then which of the other 2 should be the runner-up, do you think?
I'd take the EDG Stomp just because I think you have to have a representative. First off, it's just a great dominant showing, and it really demonstrates what EDG was for most of 2014.
Okay, this seems fair enough. So now we go on to, this is a wonderful region, European Game of the Year. Now for this, we actually only have one candidate because when you look back, let's face it, there's an abundance of wealth if you go into the Korean leagues, all the games they have a lot of playoff games, are way more as well, so there's a lot more important games to play, a lot more series overall. The game we have here for European Game of the Year is Game 4 of Fnatic versus Roccat in the semi-final of summer this year, and you have to realise, at this point, Fnatic were in what the position as Samsung Blue were in. They were up 2-1. If they win this game, as expected, Fnatic's going to beat Roccat. They're going to go to the final. They've never missed a final, remember? And obviously, Rockat's never been to a final. And somehow, in fact, let me just set it up like this, Monty. The game is going like this so far. Fnatic's doing okay. They're still in the game. It's fairly close. Reckless is like, at this point in the game that we're going to talk about now, he's like 7-1-1 on Vayne, and he's like primed. Listen, if a Vayne is 7-1-1 and it's on a really high mechanical play, you're just ready for him to kill everyone and win the whole game, you know. But actually, Roccat wins this game and forces Game 5. What stood out to you about this game, Monty?
First off, I love the start of this game because there's so many, the level 1 warding and the mind games at level 1 where Fnatic is trying to force a 2v2 and Rockat's trying to force the 2v2 and Fnatic is trying to avoid it with Vayne is just amazing. Like, there's so many little things like the recalls that are going on, trying to like get the proper lane matchups and everything like that. So it's very intelligently tactical in the early game, and I think both teams played this awesome like macro game of cat and mouse really well. And then Roccat just gets this big comeback coming in. Vayne does, as you're saying, end up getting fed. There are a couple like really apocalyptic team fights. Roccat is, overpowers on Kassadin, like trying to get angles onto this Vayne. It doesn't quite work out. Reckless is using Condemn really well throughout the entire game. And so there's just a long series of team fights that eventually culminates in Roccat coming back and getting into Fnatic space. But just that game is, like, I think hands down the best game that was played in Europe. I mean, we can talk about some other games as well, especially the SK Alliance series where Alliance made some comebacks, but in general, those games I think were a bit sloppier. And then the finals of summer was not particularly interesting. And I would say the same thing mostly for the spring playoffs as well. So for me, this was like clear cut, great examples of team fighting, really high level, intelligent like rotations and tactics. And so I think this is just a great game.
I have to say, though, as a caveat, the reason why I outlined that reckless stat there is because there's a point, like I say, where he's 7-1-1 and Fnac's doing great, or they're still in the game at least. And then when the game ends and they've lost the game, he's only something like 9-2-1. Like he didn't even get killed much. He only gets 2 more kills in the rest of the whole, 15, 20 minutes of the game. And the problem is that was always the problem that Reckless had in Fnatic. In this game, it's not that he didn't do anything. It's that he couldn't really have game impact. He was doing fine himself individually, but he never found a way to make that count. Whereas unfortunately, I mean, this is where I feel like people are sometimes unfair about letting people off the hook if they like the player and they like the person. Because if we saw a player of the caliber we're thinking of here, so a world-class AD carry who's on Vayne and he's super fed 7-1-1, if he dies, listen, say what you will about Doublelift. If Doublelift's 7-1-1 on Vayne and his team loses the game, he's going to be like 10-6-3 or something, He's going to have died a shit ton of times because he's going to have forced the game impact where he's either going to carry the game as he's the only person who can in that point, or he's going to have died a bunch. He'll never die with like one extra death and then that's just the end of the game. Like that, unfortunately, listen, at the time you can see the situations and why it plays out like that. But if you look back, you have to say like there was something wrong with my approach there that I didn't die at least,
Yeah, I agree, and that's been like the shifter reckless problem at time. But yeah, still a really good game, all things considered.
Just to throw one out there as well, even though we're going to pick that as the game of the year, because like I say, I think it was pretty clear-cut as well. It was a really good game.
It was a really good game.
A lot of interesting aspects. If we had to just throw another one in there in terms of game of the year, I would probably say along lines of like the dominance of the Chinese ones we listed, there was the game where Alliance just 12-0'd SK in kills. They forced a surrender out of them early, because that's another game where, you remember, SK, the split before, they'd been top of the league in the regular season. They were clearly a very good team, but in this game, Alliance just tooled them completely, and there was nothing they could do. It was game over. They had to surrender.
Yeah.
So, okay, the winner of Game of the Year is that one. Now, North American Game of the Year. Again, there's one that stood out here, which was actually the last game played in North America, which was C9 versus TSM, and it was Game 5. And obviously the context here was very important because Cloud9 had won every single split they'd been in. They'd actually dominated all the other splits, and crucially, they'd always dominated TSM. And the way it was going in this series, Cloud9 had been up in the series, and then even in this game, it actually looks... I remember watching this and going, well, this is a Cloud9 sort of game, actually. It's messy, they're fighting... No one's ever even fighting in a lane. It's like you're always fighting in a fucking jungle and there's like 3 people in a bush and 2 people out of a bush. Like the sort of fight where no one can actually calculate what's going to happen in the next few minutes. They're the hardest to win, really. That's why when KT Arrows, for example, cause those fights all the time, it's really hard to fight against it because good team fighting teams don't fight that way. They fight in the middle of the map or they fight the Baron, So can you remember what was crucial about this game, aside from... the touch of RN Jesus as he came down, placed his hands upon Wild Turtle and bestowed his powers.
Thorin, one thing that really confuses me about Riot, and crits aren't true RNG. That's true, but Riot got rid of dodge.
Yeah.
They've been eliminating RNG from League of Legends, yet they keep crit, and I hate crit, Thorin, and this is why I hate crit.
Yeah,
I think people calculated that there was something like a 4% chance for those 3 crits in a row to happen.
Yeah.
So I don't feel games should be decided on that, but it was an extraordinarily close game. There was a lot of action in that game, and I think that in terms of finally getting a close finals in NA, which really hadn't happened before, that was a major leader in that. I think as another quality game that I want to bring up was Spring Semis CLG versus TSM Game 2, and even though this game hurts my soul so much, you really have to hand it to TSM for being down early. It was only a best of 3 at the time. Thank God that crappy format has been eliminated from LCS. And CLG was up after very dominating Game 1 from CLG, and they were winning Game 2. And then TSM managed to win several skirmishes across the map at the same time to mount a pretty large comeback and take the game. And that really swung the momentum of the series as well and got TSM into the finals, where they promptly got rocked. But that game in particular, I think, was some great play by TSM.
Was that the game where Bjergsen was playing Karma?
Yes.
I don't think I've ever seen the clip replayed, but I believe he might have gotten a pentakill.
Yes, he did.
No, that clip was replayed way too many times. It wasn't even like that sick a pentakill. It was just like an easy kill in the base.
Yeah,
you know?
just like running up. Like, yeah, it wasn't an impressive pentakill.
But it was replayed like it was the best shit ever.
It was a soul-crushing way to end that game, I think, for CLG.
So, okay. See, TSM fans, Monty even picked a game where, in fact, Monty's picked 2 TSM games here. One where TSM broke his heart, and that was in many ways the beginning of the end for Monty and CLG. You know, if they could have won that goddamn game, everything could have been different, fans. I'm telling you.
It actually might have. It's true.
So we'll just give them winner and runner-up in that order then. Winner, the C9 TSM game. Runner-up, the CLG TSM game. Okay, so that brings us to the last region, which is we do the 4 regions, and then we have international, just for international play only. And so the game we picked here, actually no, there's a few games for this one, but these are from Worlds, all of these ones.
No, they're not all. One's from IEM, right?
Oh, that's true, yeah. There's one from IEM as well. So there's 4 games here. First game. This is a fan favourite, Monty. We didn't just go to the Monty style of games. We also picked the ones that were exciting, okay? Even if they weren't necessarily the highest level play, they were high levels of excitement. And, okay, there was plays within them that were maybe... Sometimes you can have a play that isn't the right play, but it's the ballsy play, and it has its own merit in that play, you know? So, in that value, rather. So, a great example of that, to me, obviously, is this Fnatic versus OMG game in the group stage, the first meeting of the 2 teams, where famously... 65 minutes into the game. That already tells you it's not a multi-style game, and it probably wasn't that high level of game. 65 minutes into the game, there's a Nexus attempt where Soaz hits it quite low but gets killed on Rumble. Then Expeke comes in and he's hitting it. And then Cyanide literally gets it to 1 auto attack until OMG kill them, save it on 1 auto attack, and then obviously, as soon as that happens, if you can save a Nexus on that, it's like you get the magic boost at that point. God is like, now you must win the game. It's now like you'd think they just come back and kill the base. No, now you are to truly drive a dagger into the other person's heart. You will now definitely win the game, and as a result, OMG did win the game. And I don't think Fnatic fanboys have shut up since about how they were 1 auto attack away from killing the next, all that sort of thing.
Yeah. That was actually one of the most annoying fan reactions of all time. Because here's the thing about that game and why that fan reaction was so annoying. There were a million times that either team could have won that game, and no professional player or analyst will be like, yeah, the home guard recall was the reason why. It's like, no, that's the last reason why Fnatic didn't win that game. So, yes, a lot of these games are more high quality in terms of tactics or individual play. This game gets on the list due to sheer insane excitement. And it's one of those games where we sit at the analyst desk while we're watching this and we're freaking out too. We're like, it's really fun to be on the analyst desk during this kind of game because it is so close and it's so crazy and there's so many mistakes that are being made. So it's just kind of a shit show, but it's an exciting shit show. And so we're sitting there being like, oh my God, why isn't he doing this? What are they doing? No, he should do this. So it's it's a great game for heart-pounding action. It's like the shitty summer blockbuster, right? With a lot of explosions. And, there's some Sylvester Stallone's in it or some pumped up action hero. And the plot is absolute garbage and full of holes. It doesn't make any goddamn sense. It doesn't hang together. But the pacing is incredible. The action scenes are very well rendered in CGI. This is like the Michael Bay. Maybe better than Michael Bay. What's an action movie that's actually good? That came out recently, Thorin.
Recently? Recently is going to be hard. If you want a classic one, I'd just say something like Die Hard.
Yeah, or how about True Lies?
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, so there you go. This is the True Lies. It's
like
definitely
the scene where Arnold dives into that water and then there's petrol on the top of it and he has to swim about 50 meters before taking a breath, but he does it anyway because it's a fucking movie.
And it also has that cute romantic edge to it too. So that's a good action movie. That's a great action movie. So that's what this game was.
Also, let me just stop you here, Fnatic fans. You've got to take the rough with the smooth, as we say in my country. If you win a game because someone does a fucking backdoor around a Nexus where he perfectly just guesses where to juke so that fucking Kevin doesn't just come and kill him, which if that even happens once, if he guesses wrong once, the game's over. If you're going to get that as your win, you can't then complain a year and a half later or whatever when the same shit happens to you, essentially, the other way around, that you guess the wrong way to go.
I honestly think Fnatic fans are the most annoying fans in Europe.
Oof, that's a bold statement there, Monty. I once put it in a less harsh way, Monty. I had a more witty way of saying it, in which I insulted two fan bases at once. I said on Twitter once, Fnatic fans are the TSM fans of Europe.
You know what? Tangent. I'm not even sure TSM fans are the most annoying fans in NA. Personally, I found that the Dignitas fans last year were much ruder, like much more rude than the TSM fans. Like they get like really mean. I'm not sure what it is about like some Dignitas fans, but man, those people are just rude. So,
well, I'd just like to get us back on time. I wouldn't like to debate with you, Monty, whether or not TSM fans are ruder or what might have happened in the past. So let's just get right back on track and let's go to the next game, because the next game involved a North American team. This was when Naji and White Shield played Cloud9, and this was the tiebreaker. So the first game was the one Cloud9 had... Let me think. I think they won game 1 in the series, and I think Naji and White saw Shield... Is that the right way around? No, I think Naji White Shield won the first game, and then the second game was the one Cloud9 won. Yeah, that's right. And then the tiebreaker was played not to decide who got into playoffs, because Kaboom had already taken care of that for us. Instead, it was to decide who would come out of the group first. And crucially, this is a game where this is like... what of all the Western teams, only Cloud9 can do what they almost pulled off here. Because this is like, you get the game where actually, listen, the scoreboard said that you were over already. I think the scoreboard was something like 13-4 in kills and a whole bunch of gold for Naji and White Shield. And everything's going Naji and White Shield's way. They have all their champions fed.
High is 1-9. Goong is 9-1
on Zed, and Save is on Kassadin with some nut score as well. So the solo laners are owning. Everything is in White Shield's favour. So what can Cloud9 do? They can only set up a couple of moves where it has to be a ballsy move, has to be an ambush brush. They have to do something, and they almost pull it off amazingly, right?
This is what's so crazy about this game. It's like, first off, both of the last two Shield versus Cloud9 games were good. Definitely a shout out to the game that Cloud9 won as well, with Balls' like incredible Rumble ults. That was a great game. But for me, this game, in terms of the storyline, was really interesting. It was like this crazy tiebreaker. Like, if Shield really needed to win this to avoid like a weird like 3-way tie scenario, and actually make it out in first place of the group, and they dominated the game. But this is like pure Cloud9 right here. High international tournament. He's getting put in the dumpster in lane. Yet he still makes a huge game impact. And this is why Cloud9 is so good. They managed to get like a split push going in the bottom lane. They nearly, I mean, despite the fact that if you listen to these KDAs, Balls 1-7-2, High 1-9-0 at the end of this game. The only person who has like a positive KDA is Sneaky, who's 4-3-2. Meanwhile, on the other side, Naji and White Shield save 8-2-9 on Kassa and Goom, 9-1-10 on Zed. And yet, this is a 41-minute game because Cloud9 is so good at playing from behind and stalling these games out and trying to find that one like little avenue they have to win. So just, I think, showing a lot of brilliance in Cloud9's shot calling in this game, and they made it very competitive despite being at an insane deficit.
And also, if you're a Western fan, I know now it's popular to pretend like, well, since White Shield ends up getting 3-0'd by OMG, oh, they weren't that good anyway and they were overhyped. Just go and watch this game if you're a Western fan, because Goong and Save are godlike in this game. Like, I remember there's actually a sequence where High, and I can't remember who else it is, pull off an insane like ambush brush at the top of the map, and High comes in onto Goong immediately, and Goong has to like fucking use all his abilities perfectly on Zed to get the kill and survive with like next to no health whatsoever. Like, Goong was a fucking amazing Zed player. Like, that's one champion he definitely was very sick on. So to me, this is a great game because it showed what both teams were capable of, you know, within their own context.
And also highlighted, I think, strengths very well and weaknesses. Like, you saw the power of White Shield's solo lanes in that game. yet also their kind of inability to close games out very efficiently. And then you saw Cloud9, like their weaker mid lane in terms of the 1v1, but then their incredible ability to shot call and play from behind. So I think that was a really, really good game.
So now the next game also is Najim White Shield, and this is what was dubbed the perfect game. It's where Alliance, I think it was 12-0 on kills. They closed the game out after having a similar start in the first game they'd had against White Shield, but then fucking it up. This time they do it all right. They get the wards. Everything got, obviously this is the one where Shook goes crazy on Lee Sin. They win the game. Now, even though I want us to give it props, Monty, and this was like a great display of what another thing that a Western team was capable of doing, first of all, can we just clarify this? I feel like some fans took that phrase, perfect game, and they ran a bit too far with it. Like, it's a perfect game because they didn't die, because they closed the game out, because it didn't really give a huge chance for a comeback. It wasn't actually the perfect game. It wasn't the best game ever played in League.
Also, like, the perfect game means, like, no kills, no towers, no dragons taken by the other team, right?
Because I did hear some people talking about it. Like, I heard some people sort of saying things along the lines of like, well, you know, even Gambit at their peak couldn't manage a game like that. It's like, no, that's not exactly what they meant by perfect game. We just meant statistically a perfect game. It wasn't like the best game of the year, that's for sure. But it was a good game in terms of like, how often do a Western team do this against a top Korean team? Very, very rarely.
Also, the Alliance was so slow at closing this game. Yes, they got the perfect game, but at nearly 40 minutes, I'm pretty sure this is the longest perfect game in League of Legends history. So, like, they didn't do a great job of closing it out, even though Shook snowballed each of the lanes insanely hard. And Shook did a great job of basically, Watch had a very poor gank early, but it was in the context of an entire game, a relatively minor mistake. But Shook took that one mistake and just snowballed the entire game. It was amazing. Amazing play from Shook. Looked great decision-making, great mechanics. Froggen on Ahri was great. Of course, Wicked playing Aurelia, also great. And a solid game. But Shield hung in there, and Alliance definitely took too long to finish the game.
Just to clarify one other piece of information, Monty, because of the Kaboom incident and because of Alliance not making it out, a lot of people always point to Worlds to say that Froggen actually underperformed and he didn't live up to the billing. In this game, I've heard people's category is that they say, oh, well, he lost lane versus Goong. Now, he had less CS, Monty, but he was playing Ahri into Goong and he was making plays.
And he was roaming.
Who's supposed to win that lane there, Monty? Fucking Oriana... the passive farm mid.
Yeah, Ahri's just going to roam in that lane. So
which is what happened.
You will be down in CS.
So just to clarify all the factors of that game, because I want us to get that in context, because it's a good game as like an exhibition sort of match. It's not necessarily the sickest game from both teams overall. So the last Worlds one we have, and then we have one more game after that, was one that, oh boy, if we talked before about certain fans and certain regions, some people aren't going to like this, Monty, but if we're talking about just games that were a spectacle to watch and incredible in the magnitude of certain aspects of the game, you must say Samsung White versus TSM, Game 2 of the quarterfinal of Worlds. Now remember, Game 1 had been, a stomp. Samsung White very dominant in that game, but Game 2 was where... People forget, Game 3 they tried to style and it didn't work. Game 2 they were already starting to style, Monty. They picked late game comp, right? And then they went to super ham game. They went super ham level 1, right? And unfortunately, my boy Amazing got double buffed to fuck. Wasn't this the game where he got triple buffed? Oh,
this was the second game in a row that White triple buffed TSM.
I mean, we're talking about the team that, in theory, was the best in NA and was one of the best in all of the Western world. What level of gap was there in this particular game, would you say?
Massive. The thing about this game was why this game is on the list. I think this is a perfect example of Samsung White's early game decision-making and dominance, and also contained one of the best plays of the year, which was Looper's teleport to the blue buff. Because what happens here is that TSM tries to invade blue on Samsung White, backs off, kind of gives up actually, decides they don't want to do that. So Dandy actually starts off at his red buff, and knowing that this blue skirmish had gone on, he has a little bit of an advantage. And TSM should have pressed it harder. They actually did have a numbers advantage. So Dyrus ends up teleporting early into the top lane. And so that means Looper has TP, and because Looper knows exactly where Amazing is, like heading back down to his red buff, he starts proxy farming on Singed, like right at the start of the game. And this gets enough pressure that he's able to help Dandy go from Dandy's red to TSM's blue. And then when Amazing tries to go back to his blue, because he walks to his own blue, sees it's getting taken, loses it, then walks to Samsung White's blue, this is where Looper realizes that he has TP advantage, instantly recalls to base, heals up, TP's down, crazy fight where TSM loses a couple members, and then Pawn 1v1s Bjergsen at the same time, Fizz versus Zed. And and then they pick up all the kills from that. And that's like, that play in and of itself not only is just an insane team play, and one of the highlights of 2014 for sure. So this game showing White's dominance, showing their decision making, and also the fact that they were able to make these decisions on a non-meta champion as a team with Singed was crazy. So to me, this is like White's actual like shining moment of brilliance at Worlds was, I think, this game.
So here's what you're going to love, Monty. The last game we have in this category is Gambit versus KT Bullets, game 2 of the semi-final from IAM Katowice. And here's the key thing that you might have even forgotten about this context, Monty. This was actually the last moment of glory for Gambit, really, if you think about it. Because after this, LCS didn't go so well. They actually, for the first time, didn't place top 4. Alexic left. Everything went to shit, basically. But at least in this game... Now listen, they lost the series 0-2, and game 1 had actually been fairly good by KT Bullets. That's the one where Insec was on Kha'Zix and he was just going everywhere, getting everything going for him. Game 2, it looks like the same thing again. Okay, this game, I'll describe... I put some notes for this one because this was one of my favourites actually. Game 2 is like everything that I loved about Gambit. Because what you have to... I always say, separate Gambit and Moscow 5. Because Moscow 5 was the dominant, best team in the world, really awesome. Every player had times when they were doing awesome. Gambit wasn't like that at all. It was the same players, but they had decayed. Some of them weren't even playing fucking solo queue. And it's like now all they had to go on was that clutchness, that like ballsiness. All they had to go on was that like that... The sort of gamesmanship that they would have when it came to a LAN. That's all they had left to rely on. And so they were very exciting as Gambit, but they weren't the dominant the team they were as M5. So this game starts just immediately in classic Gambit fashion, okay, Monty? Because the game starts with the KT Bullets players repeatedly getting into situations where they're definitely going to get a kill onto Darien. So all Darien does, who's on Shyvana, is just abuse like the W and the ultimate and just like fuck off around their base. At which time Gambit twice in a row just goes and takes an objective while KT Bullet are chasing Darien within their own base or up on the top area. And it's like a classic move where it's like, that's one thing that never translated over to Korea, Monty, is that you never had any top laner who thought to himself like, well, I'll just go and die now, but entirely draw the entire other team away to kill me in their own base while we take an object. That never entered into the Korean meta. So as a result, it takes you a while to figure out that's what's happening, you know, because you just think to yourself, this idiot's in our base, let's go and kill him for free, you know. So that alone was like a classic Gambit moment there. Then it's going to shit for Gambit after that, okay? Actually, Gambit, at like the 36-minute mark, Gambit is down by over 10 kills, but with like a classic Gambit fight where you just keep repeatedly turning onto a different person in like perfect... I'm sure they don't say fuck all in Korean, dude, except for like see hero, kill it, whatever that lame thing they said was. They somehow keep turning and they turn this insane fight. Get the Baron from like... They go from like... Get the Baron, only lose 2 people or something ridiculous. At this point in the game, it looked like it was out of control for KT Bullets because Kassadin, who was played by Ryu, was on something ridiculous like 13, 3 and 13 at this point in the fucking game, 13, 3 and 13. So that's Kassadin, remember? That's like game over already. But Alexic, crucially, the hero Alexic is on Kha'Zix. And then like 5 minutes later, Gambit manages to get an ace with only 1 death. And Alex at this point is on like 15, 4 and 5 on that Kha'Zix. And if you remember the old Kha'Zix before the rework, if you just got like those resets, you could do anything. But you had to get the kill. That's the thing. You had to be able to assassinate the first guy. But if you did, you could be the hero who could bring the game back. Now here's what's mental, is that ace that came for Gambit came after they dicked around with the Baron buff for so long that it just wore off. So KT Bullet engage onto them and Gambit wins that fight. Like, this is like classic Gambit, 'cause it's like, it doesn't even make sense to me now when I know what happened. Like, if I rewatched it, I would be pretty sure KT Bullets would win that fight. Now, you're thinking after all this, these heroic comebacks, Alex Sitch is the hero carrying the game, they've overcome a fucking 13-3 Kassadin. You're thinking the way the story must end, right, is that Gambit wins the game. It goes to 3 games. No, what happens is, this is beautiful in itself. Just to show you that Gambit weren't strategical geniuses, they get caught trying to push down the top tower while KTB just pop, like, what is that? The talisman. Just rush into the base and take the whole Nexus before Gambit can even get back and the game's over. And the game is actually over, Monty. So everything about Gambit, the beauty, the amazing quality you couldn't predict, and then just the utter failure to follow even basic rotations and like guarding your base. It's like they got it all in one game, and that was the end of Gambit. And after that moment, you know, I had a shot of whiskey, I smoked a cigar, and I saluted them as they went off into the sunset.
You weren't one of their pallbearers?
No, I don't know what happened after that morning. I believe they all retired and they never lost another game after that. You know, it was a great end to their careers. They never played Copenhagen Wolves or Roccat. That never happened.
Anyway, yeah, that series. Also, another thing about the storyline for that series is that one of the great all-time series in League of Legends is the MLG between KT Bullets and Gambit as well. So this was a continuation of that, and so there's like big storyline implications with that, considering that is one of the greatest series of all times. And one of the big regrets I will have, Thorin, forever, is that we never saw a best of 5 between these two teams. So sad. And that KT Bullets weren't at Worlds in 2013, so they could meet. But just stylistically, these teams were always very diametrically opposed, and incredibly, and like every single game those two teams played was always incredibly entertaining, and I think that's a great choice.
It also even made sense in the context of when they met here, because when they met the one you were talking about previously, they were both really good teams and they were both like near the top of their regions, and it was a clash then. Luckily, when they met here, what made it so even again is both of them had started to drop off, like, but they both had something left at the tournament, so it's like it really was just like they got the bands back together again, you know. They had that one last gig just to show what they could do, you know.
I think that's a very apt description.
Okay, so those are our games for International Series, Game of the Year, rather. So which one do you think wins International Game of the Year?
Ooh.
Because basically we had 2 stomps, which was the Najin White Shield Alliance and Samsung White TSM. And then we had 2 games where teams almost came back, which was the KTB versus Gambit and the C9 versus Najin White Shield. And then we had a really close game, which was Fnatic versus OMG. But I get the sense you don't want to give it to the really close game, Monty. I think that one's off the table, right? That's immediately Nexus hitting, that's out of the window.
I mean, I like the C9 Nacho game, but I think because Samsung White won Worlds, and this was probably their most complete game strategically and individually, the TSM versus Samsung White game, I think you got to take the stomp there.
I think that's fair. Here's the thing for people who are going to get mad at that, by the way. Think about it this way. The reason why that game was so amazing wasn't just because TSM got stomped and TSM. No, it's because one of the best Western teams couldn't even get a single foothold into the game. They got utterly dominated on every level because this team who won the whole World Championship, who we'll now never see play again, was just that good.
Also, it's just the decision making in a really weird situation for Samsung White. This is why it's so good, is because that game was such, it was like they took a champion they didn't really, that wasn't meta. They immediately knew how to use it, knew the strategy they wanted to run, reacted perfectly to everything TSM did, and punished TSM so freaking hard. It wasn't even necessarily that TSM was playing badly. It's that Samsung White was just 10 steps ahead of them in that game and reacting perfectly, and showed kind of the brilliance of Dandy in particular. So that game was incredible.
So then we'll give runner-up to the C9 Najin White Shield then.
Yeah, that was a good game too.
Okay, so overall, that brings us to Game of the Year. Now, I get the feeling much like with our Player of the Years, Monty, that the Korean ones will just apply here.
Yeah.
True?
Yep.
Okay. So I think that's fair enough. I mean, in this particular category, I mean, for player, to me, it's not even that debatable. But for the games, anyone who thinks any of these international games compared to the games we're talking about from Korea, please go and watch the game from Korea again, then come back to here. Yeah.
Also, just because a Season of Champions is arguably a harder tournament than Worlds. So I think you got to give it to KTA versus Samsung Blue Game 4. And I think that the runner-up has to be KTB versus SKTK Game 3.
So now we move on to the series of the year. And again, we're going to do it by regions. Now, crucially, we're not going to talk about every single game here, particularly because some of these games, the best games already, come from some of the series. So if we go to Korean series of the year first, the first one that I have listed is the final of OGN Summer, KT Arrows versus Samsung Blue. The best final in history. Do you think it eclipsed the old SKT versus KT? No. You don't think so?
No.
Well, it was the second best then in history, right?
Yeah. I still think KT Bullets SKTK summer final was the best of all time. Just because it was exciting, but it was also just tactically, I think, superior and showed more diversity in terms of strategy. Whereas like KT Arrows were just kind of like hitting one note with their strategy this entire series, and Blue kind of failed to adapt. Meanwhile, Bullets won the first couple of its games, and then SKT reacted really well. And then, of course, it ended with like the greatest single play of all time, mechanical play of all time in League of Legends. So you can't get much more hype than that series.
But that's also why I think you could make a case for this, though.
No.
Here's why you could make a case, Monty. Because Blue lost the series, and yet in nearly every game, they could have won every game. Even in the blind pick, they could have won at times.
But I think the quality of play was lower.
Sure, but what an incredibly closest final in that respect then.
It was the closest, because a lot of the SKT-KTB games were one-sided. It just happened to be one-sided for one team or another, and it was based off of strategic adaptation. I don't know. For me, that series is still the best, and I will be surprised, very pleasantly surprised, if anything ever eclipses it in League of Legends history.
I mean, the crazy thing also about this final, KTA versus Samsung Blue, for me, is that KT Arrows never played at that level a day before or a day after that final.
It's true.
They brought their absolute max level. And crucially, Samsung Blue did not shit the bed. They did not do badly. They did very well. Like, I made the case when this final happened that it was the best losing effort I've ever seen from a team in an OGN final. Like, really awesome stuff. Like I say, every match still in it, almost winning 3-1, then can have chances in the blind pick. Even when they almost had lost in the blind pick, then Dadi did those crazy plays in the base. The whole thing was fucking amazing. It was a really, really awesome series.
It definitely, you can make an argument, I think, that it is the best of five ever played, and that it's at the very least top two.
Okay, so if we move on to another one we've also taken a game from, was in the semi-final of Winter. We had KTB versus SKT. Now, again, we're going to have to explain some of the context a bit more than before, because when people hear that this was a 3-0 for SK Telecom and that SK Telecom won the season undefeated, they're going to naively maybe think, oh, well, how could that have been a great series then?
Well, again, going back to the story points, this is yet another iteration of the great rivalry between those two rosters on KT and SKT. And yes, it was a 3-0, but it was one of the closest 3-0s ever. And KT Bullets were very, very close to winning that last game if Faker hadn't just like gone full Faker and carried the game on Riven. So that series is really solid and really interesting to watch, and also just, I think, underscores SKT's resilience and dominance at the time, because even it showed how good they were, that even when pretty much everybody else on SKT was losing, Faker was still able to hard carry games.
Also, let's not mess around. That was the real final that year.
Yes, it was.
Just for anyone who lives in a dream world that the other side of the bracket was good, it wasn't.
Yeah, Samsung was... Yeah, basically, Samsung was not anywhere, I think, as good as the KT Bullets that season.
So, the third one we have here is Samsung White versus Samsung Blue, semi-final of, I assume, summer this year.
Yeah.
So this was the one where, again, a convincing win for Blue. But crucially, also the thing to mention about this as well is that both seasons, spring and summer, part of what made it seem so much like Samsung White would win is that both times they'd just beaten down SKT. So every time you kept thinking like, well, they're we know they're in peak form, you know. Like I remember the first time they met in the spring one was when Input had that crazy game on Twitch where he completely destroyed him. You thought, wow, who can even touch these guys, you know? In the summer one, for the overall series, what made Blue able to win again convincingly, do you think?
Just their team fighting, and I think their familiarity with Samsung White really helped out. But Samsung White just hadn't kind of gotten together their late game shot calling at that stage, and I'm not sure they ever really did, honestly, because their early game was so refined and so crushing at the World Championship that we never even really got to see them, I would argue, in a close late game scenario, right? We never really got that chance. So Blue, again, that was one of our games. Game one from this series was up for the best game in Korea because it was Def's like early massive deficit, but he still managed to make a huge difference in that game, managed to claw his way back into it, and Blue really showing off their team fighting and their lane swapping abilities throughout this series. And I thought coming in that White was the favorite, but Blue did really, really well. And in spite of White getting out to a really strong start in game one, I think that Blue coming back and winning that game really set the tone for that series. And just fantastic series overall, though.
I also think a piece of interesting context is that there is a tendency with fans, unfortunately, where once something happens, like if someone wins like 3-0 or 3-1, they think, oh, well, now that I know that happened, that must always have been the way it was going to go. But actually, I did my interview with the Samsung White and Blue players before this tournament began. It was one that had just begun at the beginning of summer. And I asked a question to, I forget if it was Deft that I asked this of. I think it was. I said to Deft, like, no team in history aside from SK Telecom ever went back-to-back. So what would your team have to do to win it? And he didn't say anything about what they would have to do to win. He just said, well, something along the lines of, we always lose to White in practice. So if we can just beat White, that will be enough. Because they essentially thought White was the best team. So again, that's part of actually a factor, I think, as to why White did get beaten by Blue these two times. Because I think White, even after the first time, thought to themselves, like, well, that was the anomaly. Like, well, we should beat this team. You know, we beat them all the time in practice, or we were the better team, or even internally within Samsung, we're thought of as the better team. So it should happen. I think maybe these two losses woke them up to a degree that we have to change something, you know. It's not, we can't just play out how we've done it before. That works against everyone else, obviously.
Quite possibly.
Okay, so just based on how things were before, the winner, based on our conversation here, has to be KT Arrows versus Samsung Blue.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, there were some other good series as well. I think just to briefly, we don't need to go into all these, but briefly to shout out some other series that happened this year that were really good. OMG versus Starhorn Royal Club in the semifinals of Worlds was a great series.
We haven't got to that yet. That's going to be later.
Oh, okay.
That's not the end of the thing. It was only the Korean series of the year.
Oh,
You've blown it, man. Okay, right. Forget about that. That part didn't happen. I'm not going to edit that out. I can't be fucking bothered. Okay, so the runner-up, is that the KTB SKT semi? Or Samsung White? Which one do you want?
There's also the Blaze Shield semi from spring that was
really that's good. True. I forgot about that. Let's include that. We can talk a bit about that, actually, because that was the one where Blaze had just beaten some scrub team called KT Arrows convincingly. Flame was like MVP of that series or something, you know. Just, yeah, whatever. And then they got to the semis, and here's the thing, Monty. They were in the semi-finals, so this young guy from England books himself a second trip to Korea. He's going to go to another OGN final. And you know what? His team there, they know that they're going to play the winner out of KT Bullets versus Shield. And KT Bullets almost beat Shield. They have them right pinned down, about to deliver the killing blow. But somehow, like that scene in Game of Thrones, I won't say which one, spoilers, that somehow there's this incredible comeback and KT Bullets manages to win and get through. And after all the seasons of hurt with KT Bullets, now KT Bullets are trash. And now Shield got through. Now Shield's there. They've beaten KT Bullets for him. You don't even have to play KT Bullets now. But Shield didn't look good. This time, Blaze is going to the final. The young man's going to come to Korea and he's going to get to see the final he always wanted to see. And this was actually an awesome best of five. Goes the full 5 games. you actually get to see both teams playing in classic form, because you got to see strong play from Gung and Save over on the Shield side. Blaze was winning their games with the classic Blaze style, where you go to 40 minutes, you shouldn't be able to win, but you get that window where somehow you get the one fight and then you go all the way down to their base and you win the game. Like, sadly, it doesn't work for more than two games out of a best of 5, but it's good for getting you some exciting series that you then get your heart broken in. What did you think of this series overall?
It was very back and forth. I really liked watching this series. I would actually say this is the second best series in Korea overall. And especially the last game, it was LeBlanc versus LeBlanc, and that's one of my plays of the year as well, which is the Gung Ambition duel. Because what happens is there's this like craziness that happens in the mid lane, and there's a gank and a counter gank. So Shield comes in and Watch is there, and he gives up double buffs to Ambition in this as Daydream is counter ganking, and there's a bit of a roam too from, I believe it's the top lane. So I believe Flame is there. Trying to remember if it's Flame or the support. Anyway, there are 3 people from Blaze in the mid lane, and so Ambition gets first blood. He gets double buffs, and in a blind pick in a mirror matchup, this is a fucking disaster. Like, this is like 3.5 minutes into the game, and basically because mirror matchups can snowball so hard, like Gung is screwed if this goes on. So right after this happened, Gung stands there for a minute, and he's like, "Fuck it." And he just goes in while there are still 3 members of Blaze standing in the mid lane. He goes in 1v3, manages to kill Ambition, and then Daydream kills Gung. So all it does is reset the double buffs, so it doesn't actually snowball any of the lanes with double buffs. And that one play was probably the reason why Blaze didn't go to the finals. Like, if Ambition had just like backed off like a little bit faster, gotten out of there, not stuck around, but like Gung had massive balls to try that, because if he had failed that play, like, well, first off, if he did nothing, he probably would have lost. But if he had screwed that up, he definitely would have lost, right? Like, what's the worst case scenario that happens? He dies there as well. Ambition picks up another kill alongside the double buffs. So talk about like a ballsy play. That play was so game changing and brilliant from Gung. Loved it. So the fact that series ended like that too was really cool.
Okay, we'll give that a runner-up then. So for Chinese, for this one we only have one series overall, because it is the upper semi-final between OMG and Starhorn Royal Club, which was a 3-2 affair, and this was actually one of the first moments that Starhorn Royal Club really sort of came forwards. Before that, they'd actually been considered like, well, when they initially got InSec and Zero, they were sort of a middling team and no one really knew how good they would be. And initially it didn't look that good, actually. Like, they had no coordination. But this is when they started to kind of make an impact, like, oh, maybe these guys are going to be something. Now, admittedly, we thought they'd only be the 3rd best team, which they turned out to be a bit better than that at Worlds, but this series overall, we have to admit your biases here, Monty. There's a part of you just thinks, like, that was a shit series, and as much as it was 3-2. It wasn't the most high level played every game.
No, it wasn't, but it was really exciting. And yes, this was the version of OMG with Dada, but it was a reverse all kill for OMG. Starhorn Royal Club, based off of Uziai's play, goes up early really well. But the thing is, this is also the series where Cool got that 21-8 score onto Yasuo. But the last 3 games of this series, Cool basically just put on his carry pants and just destroyed Starhorn. Like, listen to these stats. Game 3, Orianna 8-0-13. Game 4, Yasuo 21-8. Game 5, Rise 10-2-8. Like, incredible play from Cool in the last 3 games. He picked it up so hard and managed to basically just drag OMG into the winner's bracket.
And you know as well, that's the famous insect curse. Like, wasn't that where they made that gif afterwards, where it was like the devastation on his face every time they got to 3-0?
The insect reverse all killed.
And they would keep doing those, because that's one of the things, by the way, OGN, I'm sorry to the Riot broadcast, but you will never be as good at OGN as doing those face reaction shots. Like when they just kept flashing onto Insect's face, it's like they were ready, like the most cynical tabloid journalist guy. You know, when someone's going to cry and they're like, keep shooting, keep the camera on. Like it's like that. They go right in on his face as like the devastation. It's like that. You know that famous clip, Monty, from that old school Simpsons episode where Lisa has to like break Ralph Simpson's heart that she's not actually in love with him. She'd only like pretended to be, like she made him a Valentine's card because he's like a loser. Ralph, whatever his name, Ralph Wiggum. Yeah. And they have that famous bit where when she has to tell him like in front of everyone, like I'm not in love with you or whatever, like I hate you or something. Like Bart films it and then he like slows it down and then he like freeze frames it and he goes, that's the moment when his heart broke.
Yep.
And you see like the devastation, like
how would we have without
the Ryu face?
How would we have Ryu face? How would we have Piglet smirk? Like these things are classic. And by the way, if Faker looking fucking amazed, like after I tell you guys to go back and watch that KT Bullets versus SKT game 3, there's a great shot of Faker where like the Nexus is down at 100 HP and he dies and the entire team dies and he's like, like he's like, oh shit, like the oh shit Faker face is like one of those great shots as well.
Yeah. So there's the winner for that one, Chinese Series of the Year. I'm so sorry, Kelsey. That's all we could do. We couldn't stomach out. Listen, we watched some fucking games. We're not going to watch like 10 series of China. Sorry. Get better next year, China. Then we'll watch. So North America. In North America, the winner of this was pretty obvious.
TSM versus C9 Summer Finals.
I mean, the big problem in LCS that you have to always say is that the first split was only best of 5 in the final, so automatically means a 3-2 final is probably going to be better than a 2-1 because it's going to have to be an exceptional 2-1 to really overtake it.
Cloud9's insane dominance for most of LCS finals means that there's really not that many exciting series.
And then we're giving the runner-up to TSM CLG semi-final.
Yeah, that was a good series. That was a good series.
Now in Europe. So in Europe, we have 2 that are here, and you have to decide between them. So the first one, and this is one I enjoyed watching especially, was Alliance versus SK.
I think that is the series. Even though in terms of results it was one-sided, those games were all really, really close.
What's so sick about that final, Monty, is when you come to write like the kind of articles I like to write, where it's like a profile or a history of someone's career. Within people's careers, there will always be interesting story notes, and you can always tell the story in a way that will be meaningful. You know, no matter what the result is, win or lose, you know, because it'll have a similar sort of impact. But every now and then, there's a perfect storyline that could be completed. So, for example, if you were to write a story about Insect now, the fact that he finally did overcome against EDG the curse of being down and then almost getting reverse all killed. The fact he overcame that makes the story more satisfying, that like all his tribulations, finally overcame it. I almost had that happen in this semi-final, because when I was watching it, here's the context that people will forget. SK actually hadn't been impressive in the summer split. They'd been struggling. They'd be down in like 5th place, and they were finding it hard to even get past Millennium or past Super Hot Crew. Meanwhile, Alliance was just running away with the whole league. They had a league best record start, and then they were dominating everyone. They ended with I think it was like 21-7 or something, like some insane stats. And so it was their tournament to lose in the playoffs. But the thing about SK that we always stressed was this was a really good tactical team. And on this one day when they met in the semi-finals, this SK team almost did like some movie shit where they find out exactly the approach that's going to win. In a bunch of these games, they're fucking winning lane against Alliance. They're winning the initial team fights. They're in the middle of the game. It looks like Alliance is going to choke. And yeah, listen, Alliance would have still been the better team, but SK almost pulled it off. And so I was ready to write that N-rated career story of like the genius guy finally came through with like the ultimate win over all the mechanically godlike players who should never be able to lose. And he came up with the movie plot, like the flying V formation that defeats them finally. But sadly, well, not really sadly, the Alliance sort of, that was like the moment they overcame to me their problems of when they would choke and they sometimes had bad shot calling. They managed to overcome in this series, and crucially, this was a really good Froggen series actually. He had some really top-notch stats here, like 3 of the he had 1 bad game on Zerath. I wonder if that would ever come back to haunt him. Probably not. Just don't worry about that. His games on Ari were really good. And then crucially in game 4, he, at the time, remember people were going AD champs mid. Game 4, he picks Tristana and he carries pretty hard in this game. And crucially, the joke, which I thought was a good joke, so I'll repeat it now, was people said, like, once he won that game, people said, Froggen is even the best AD carry on Alliance. Which is a good joke. You have to admit, it's the idea that, like, cause the AD carries like Tristana was so OP, Froggen was like, just give it here. And then he just won with it just to show how OP it was. Like, that was a good series, though, right, Monty?
It was a great series, and I think it edges out. Even though I think Fnatic Roccat had the better game, I think overall in the course of the series that was the better series.
Yeah, I thought it was good. And crucially, for all the complaints that Froggen was a passive farmer and all that sort of thing, this is a series where he was playmaking. Like I said, 2 of the games were on Ari. Probably the best game was Game 3 in that series, where it was really back and forth. SK had the lead. Froggen was on Ari. Tabs was on Trist. And they did like those two really carried the game. They carried the fights late. And SK was in position sometimes to win that game. Now, the other series, obviously, as we've referenced here, it's the Alliance Fnatic. Oh, no, this Fnatic is the other one. Okay, yeah, there's that one. Actually, there's 2 then, because there's that one. Alliance Roccat was a 3-2, and it was where Roccat really gave them all they could handle in that series. Like, they really were close to making they were close to making Worlds just from that series, even though they didn't end up doing so. I have one other series, though, that I'd forgotten to mention to you before, which was in the spring season, in the semi, when Alliance played Fnatic. And it was 2-1 to Fnatic.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
And that was like, Alliance after that weren't as impressive because then they lost to Roccat in the 3rd place game. But in that series, they really were close to getting to the final, actually. They had a solid run in that series. And if you remember the context, actually, Fnatic were the ones who hadn't been doing that super well in the rest of the split. They were doing well, but Alliance were the ones who came in really hot to the playoffs. And so everyone was thinking, oh, maybe this is Alliance's time. Maybe they've got everything together and they're going to do it. But no, Fnatic were clutch in the playoffs, which is another famous quality they've had. They made another final. They've never failed to make a final so far. All 4 they've made. So the winner is going to be Alliance versus SK. And then second place we're going to give to the Roccat Alliance, Fnatic.
Yeah, I would give it to the 2 semis from Summer.
Okay. Now, International Series of the Year. Now, we have 2 here. So one is one I already referenced the game from, which is Gambit versus KT Bullets, IEM Katowice.
Mm-hmm.
Just the context of it's great. Has a really great match in the second game. And also just, it's so rare. Even though they lost, it's so rare that you'd ever get a series where, unfortunately, in modern day, a Western team really does compete with the Korean team. It just doesn't happen nowadays, unfortunately. And you get the odd game, maybe. But overall, you needed it. That was the one thing Gambit was always good for. They could always bring out the clutch series against a really good foreign team and do seemingly the impossible, even if they didn't pull it off in this case. The other series was one we alluded to before. It was the semi-final of Worlds, OMG versus Starhorn Royal Club. And coming into this, I think a lot of people actually had OMG to win this series, right? Because of what happened against Najim White Shield.
Yeah, I think OMG was definitely the favorite going in. They looked really crisp. Also, just historically, yes, like in terms of the regional finals. Oops, sorry, I dropped something. Starhorn had beaten OMG 2-0, but in the context of the LPL summer season and how that ended, there were actually 2 3-2 victories for OMG. So like it was looking like pretty good historically for OMG as well. And also those were all games that were played with Dada instead of Cloud. Yeah. So you would think that they would have had a little bit of edge now that they had their kind of better support back into the main lineup. But a super close series. I think that was the best series at Worlds. So for me, that one would edge out like a best of 3 between KT Bullets and Gambit. Just the context was more important in terms of the semis at Worlds. It was a best of 5. It was an extraordinarily close series. We did see a lot of carry potential from both sides. And no other series at Worlds was quite as compelling, I think.
Also, I'll just point this out as well, is that apparently if you get to win by destroying either being saved from a Nexus backdoor or you make a Nexus backdoor. It's like sort of voodoo, you have to like give it, you have to pay a heavy sacrifice in order to get this power, Monty. It's an unholy power to a degree. So if you do it, then the gods will grant you that. But they will demand, likewise, that you suffer a cruel, heartbreaking blow where you almost kill a Nexus or you get one killed on you. And so in this series, we had one of those games as well, if you remember, where I think it wasn't it OMG that were close to winning by a Nexus destruction and it didn't happen for them?
Yeah.
So yeah, that will happen to you. So it went from Fnatic to OMG, then OMG were like, awesome, it's great to win like that. And then Star and Roll Club were like, really, is it great to win like that? Let's see what you think when you're on the other end of it. Is it a great game? I don't know. So yeah, that was a good one. I've actually just remembered there's one other I should reference now that I should have put in the other category. For Chinese Series of the Year, one I forgot was actually the final of the regional, EDG versus Star and Roll Club. I think it was a 2-1 because it was best of 3 in that format, and that was actually where amazingly Star and Roll Club were able to compete with EDG, where all year long EDG had always been out ahead, they'd been out front of all these teams, but that one was a Uzi played really well, and early on they were doing really well, and actually they'd adapted their style a bit, and so yeah, add that one to your list when you go back.
Yeah, that's true too. That was mostly a seeding match though, because both of them had already qualified, so it was just about who got first seed versus second seed, which actually worked out in Starhorn Royal Club's favor. Interestingly, even though they got the second seed out of China, just because EDG got put in a group with
White,
so
and they couldn't go
Starhorn got put in the easiest group in Worlds.
So Series of the Year is KT Arrows versus Samsung Blue.
That's it. You got it. Nailed it. Also, even the fucking location for that finals was great. It was on the beach in Busan. I was like in a tuxedo with like without shoes on, running around in the sand. Just the shots, the aerial shots, like everything about that. It was like epic location, beautifully produced, freaking great games, like just so good all around.
So 3 of the plays that we have 4 plays as candidates for Player of the Year. 3 of them you've mentioned already, so the videos will be there in the article, like all the other VODs, etc. You had the Faker Riven Flash versus KTB. You had the Goon Ambition duel. You had the Looper TSM teleport, and then the one you didn't mention, so I want you to reference it now, is Dade versus Expeke duel.
Yes, those were my picks for Play of the Year, and obviously there are going to be a lot more great plays. But when I tried to kind of narrow this list down and how I define the great play, it has to have like major game impact, like game-changing impact, the one play. So it has to be mechanically impressive or strategically impressive or both, and really like alter the outcome of the game. So like the Dade Expeke duel, when it was Talon versus Dade was playing Talon, Expeke was playing Zed. One of the closest mechanical duels ever, and this is the game where Fnatic beat Samsung Blue. And you have to remember too that Dade has something like a 90% professional win rate when he plays Zed. So beating this guy Zed like beating a Zed at a duel is like, sorry, I got that reversed. Other game, I mistook the game. Sorry, but this is when Zed was being played by
Dade?
By Expeke.
Is that right? Let's double check the facts on that.
Sure. One. Yeah. Dade's playing Talon. Expeke was playing Zed, and it's a duel that happens by the small golems.
Yeah.
And so this isn't the game. This is the game Fnatic lost actually, which is why this duel, even though it's very impressive from Expeke's end, wasn't as impactful on the whole game. But certainly probably the best 1v1 that we had in the past year. And what makes this play so amazing is that Dade they both would have died, except Expeke kills the double golems for the heal to live through the ignite. And so just an utterly fantastic mechanical play from both sides, from both players actually, and super, super exciting. So that's definitely one of the best players of the year, is Expeke winning over Dade in that little duel.
But what wins Play of the Year though?
But see, for me, it's still the Looper TP versus TSM, because that was for me, that is the culmination, that is the epitome of the top lane teleport meta. It was everything that the teams had figured out about how to 3-buff in that game, like what Dandy was doing, how to play the map, how to use teleport to get an advantage with the top laner, like playing on the meta at the time. It also included the 1v1 between Pawn and Bjergsen, the Fizz Zed duel that Pawn's Fizz won. And they picked up kills off of it, snowballed the game massively. It was like such a fantastic team. It featured great mechanics, team-wide effort, forethought in strategy from Samsung White. Absolutely gorgeous play. Of course, Faker 1v9ing in that one game 3 was really impressive. Like having the balls to like reverse when you're like go back in when your top and jungle have been chunked out and there's virtually no damage on the enemy team with Riven was absolutely insane. So that's like, I think, number 2. And then Goong versus Ambition, like Goong's decision making right there. But the thing about Goong's play is it was less impressive mechanically than it was the decision and the balls to make that play. So I think the Samsung White play versus TSM had it all. Teamwork, strategy, mechanics, duel. Whereas like Dade Expeke, fantastic mechanics, great duel, wasn't impactful really on the game. The Faker Riven flash was it was really, really important to that game and very mechanically impressive, but didn't have that same team or strategy aspect. And Goong and Ambition was great great decision, impressive plays. So that's my reasoning. So I give it to Looper's TP.
Okay. I mean, obviously, off camera, I voted for Wild Turtle's like killing spree at the end of the C9 game, but I'm actually contractually obliged to continue playing this persona, in which my motivation is that I hate TSM, so I'm not allowed to actually bring that up. So I'll have to. It's also an obligation of my contract that I'm not allowed to veto anything Korean, otherwise Monty wouldn't be part of the show anymore. So he got this leverage over me after the on-gamers rift, you know.
Hey, I picked an Expeke beating Dade.
Okay, yet you equally sicken me as the person I was describing then as my fake real personality, Monty. No, what I think we did good here, Monty, is that we got together a nice batch of medicine that will be the panacea to all that ails the Western scene, and it will heal them. It's sort of like ayahuasca, though. It'll take them through hell. It'll teach them some things about their life. But crucially, to get them to drink this brew that will probably make them purge themselves and vomit up their disgusting fandom and casual filthiness, it will also contain the sugary honey topping, Monty, of crap like C9 versus TSM and Dade getting inconsequentially killed in a game that his team wins. We've put that on top, Monty, to bring them in, to trick them to come into this world that we created. So I think we've done a good job here. We've set out to accomplish, what we wanted.
That's right. And, the first process to healing and watching these great games is you go back and you look at these games that you may not have seen to really pick through and look at some of the absolute top games of League of Legends. Is that here's what you do. You stop watching the vlogs and you start watching the actual gameplay and fall in love with the game itself, and not somebody because they speak English and they're capable of using a webcam like me.
No, stay in love with us, but not just players, though, Monty. Don't only watch the games. You've got it all wrong here, Monty. You've given the wrong message completely. There's nobody going to watch next year's awards. They're all just going to be experts about Korea. Stay ignorant, people. Everything is under control. We are in control of the airwaves. And so I think that's the end of the episode. So that's the end of your awards. We'll be back next year. Well, I mean, at this point in esports, that's a pretty bold claim to make. If we're still around and if we're still alive and we're still in esports and have jobs in Korea and still play League of Legends, then we'll be back. In which case, watch Somebody Insight in the meanwhile. But if you don't watch that, come back in a year.